Welcome and good morning everyone to Weird Weekend, because apparently, even though the calendar says it's April the 8th, it looks like we're closer to January the 8th, given the temperature over here. Anyways, we have our update on our Mythic Plus situation for the season, as we are approaching. We are right at the time where we can start counting down the resets left before Season 2. So, let me open my calendar. Apparently now we are 1, 2, 3, about 4 resets away before the end of this season, and 5 resets away before the start of Season 2. So, we are that close to the release of Season 2, and we are here to check how the situation has been going so far in Mythic Plus. Not much so to see who is OP right now, but more so to see who is in pole position, who is positioning quite well to be a powerful and popular spec for Season 2. Right, for the question of, hey guys, what should I play in Season 2? What looks OP in Season 2? Who is flavor of the month in Season 2? This is where we can start finding out. Let's start by looking at the tanks. Well, the question for the tanks is quite simple. This is for all levels, by the way. We are not being elitists today. We are looking at all keys as well. And in the all keys, I am surprised to see how much optimism there is towards Guardian Druids. They are surprisingly populated at all key levels. And of course, Protection Warrior still retains some pretty good popularity in all key levels. Of course, as soon as you enter the competitive side of keys, Guardian Druid, for example, becomes the least popular spec. And we have almost, because it's not happened yet, but almost Prot Paladin passing Protection Warrior. It's not quite the time. Surprising, but welcome still the stable position of Blood Decay, which just remained on the side to watch Prot Paladin and Prot Warrior overtake each other, and Blood Decay stayed in the 18-ish% popularity, so it's pretty healthy overall. And then you have the highest level of keys where, yes, we do see the massive growth of Protection Paladin, which is now reaching near 50% of the tanks in this very high level of key. So that's the current situation for tanks. And of course, once you see this, you can tell that the general idea for the following season, for Season 2, is that obviously Prot Paladin is in pole position, is the first tank you are looking towards when going into the next season. It's a very clear situation. Where things start getting a little bit more interesting is in healers, because in healers, at all levels, the situation is somewhat okay. We almost have all of the classes above 10% representation. The only one that is slacking behind is Mistweaver Monk, but that's not news anymore. We still see Evoker being quite popular, but not nearly as popular as the good old days before they got significantly nerfed. Resto Druid remains the most popular healer of the expansion overall. And then once you look at the very competitive level of keys, we see that for the first time in a while, Preservation Evoker goes below 30%, and now also Restoration Shaman gets to roughly 19% of popularity, so it keeps growing as well in the very high level of keys. None of the other healers has really changed their position in Mythic Plus. I am saying this is a more interesting situation than the one for tanks, because of course you also have to keep in mind what happens in the raid, where the situation for the tanks is closer to like who is meta in Mythic Plus ends up being brought in the raid. It's not really that you're gonna be bringing the best tank for the raid, because it's not that impactful. When it comes to healers, it can change a lot, because there can be a drastic difference in who is very powerful in the raid and who is very powerful in Mythic Plus. So for the moment, it's a much more balanced situation for healers. For example, it's likely that priests will be quite popular in the raid, but not really in Mythic Plus. Holy Paladins are likely still going to be a staple in the raid, but they don't seem to be too strong in Mythic Plus getting into Season 2. What about Resto Shaman? Resto Shaman, after the Giga buffs they have received recently, they now have the highest HPS in the raid, and they are also rising steadily in Mythic Plus. So the overall situation for healers is much more questionable. To try to guess, to try to pick correctly which healer you should play, for example, for Season 2. It's likely it will be defined more by the balance tuning before the next season, by the tier set tuning before the next season overall, compared to a situation a bit more straightforward like the tanks, which is like go for Prot Paladin, you are somewhat safe, right? So for healers, we will have to wait a bit more to see how it shapes up for Season 2. Now, for the melee, there might be also something quite interesting here, given what we have seen with Ret Paladin and Ret going through their rework. For example, if you see all the key levels, it's not really that surprising that Ret Paladin is the third most popular spec overall, even getting close to passing Fury and to getting close to Havoc Demon Hunter. So this is a clear sign that the rework has pushed a lot of Paladin players towards trying Ret Paladin out. Of course, if you look at the more competitive level of keys, it's still not bad. It's still not bad because in the 20 plus range, Ret Paladin goes from being the third most popular to being the second most popular. It is still behind Havoc Demon Hunter, but it's above everyone else. Of course, you can argue that once you put warriors together and once you put rogues together, they are far above Ret Paladin, but if we are looking at the individual spec, Ret Paladin is also doing quite well in this higher level of keys. The situation, of course, doesn't stay that positive for Ret Paladin once you look at the 25 plus range, once you start looking at the Mythic Plus title kind of range, where Ret Paladin loses out, not just to Rogue, not just to Havoc, but also starts losing out to Enhancement Shaman as well, for example. This might be something that has to do with time. There might simply take too much time for many Ret Paladins to suddenly become one of the top Mythic Plus pushers, given the short amount of time they have to change the meta, essentially. But we will see also that it is rising in popularity despite looking this small. If you consider that, for example, just a few months ago, this number, 8.6% for Ret, was much lower down, it is still growing overall. So when you look at the melee DPS and you start thinking, okay, what should I be rolling? What should I be re-rolling if I want to play Season 2? Of course, we are making a Mythic Plus focused video today, so let's just talk about having Mythic Plus as your end game activity in mind. Obviously, the ones that don't really seem to be changing that much for now are Rogues and Havoc Demon Hunter. There is also quite some positive vibes around Enhancement Shaman, which has grown for the entire expansion, and the tier set as well for Season 2 is looking very good as well, and of course the rework of Ret Paladin. Now, if you are a masochist, you might still be pushing for Feral, you might still be pushing for Survival, for Frost, and for Unholy Decay. Maybe not really a masochist, but a little bit of a niche hipster. You might be going for Warrior in Mythic Plus. Yes, we live in a day where you are a flavor of the month chaser if you play Ret Paladin, and you are a hipster if you play Warrior. That's right, we live in these times nowadays, but it looks like even for melee DPS, the more standard pick might still continue to be Rogue and Havoc Demon Hunter, given the changes with the Hopium tank attached to the back of all of the Ret Paladin enjoyers, hoping that it will continue, this growth of Ret Paladin will continue in Season 2. The last of the roles is also the more boring of the roles, given that not much has been changing recently. I will give applause, a round of applause, to all of the specs being quite balanced and even at all key levels. You can see most players are enjoying playing all of the specs right now, so it seems to be quite even. However, of course, as you enter the plus 20 and over range, you start seeing a bit more of a divide in certain choices of the player base. You still have the continued growth at this level of the two previously buffed specs, Balanced Druid and Shadow Priest, which ended up dominating the very high-end level of Mythic Plus. You still have some of the of the outlier choices for the range DPS, like for example, Destruction Warlock has been growing continuously to now become one of the more popular picks in Mythic Plus compared to before. Same goes for Fire Mage. Frost Mage is the default choice for many mages, but as soon as you enter the more competitive level of keys, for example, Fire Mage grows a lot, as well as we already mentioned, Destruction Warlock. Here, once you start looking at the future, once you start looking at wanting to be, predicting what you might be playing in the next season, there is of course not too much to be excited about given the current state of Devastation Evoker, as well as Elemental Shaman, as well as, at the moment, given the changes, Arcane and Affliction Warlock. You still have the possible, disaster of getting the mini rework to Balance Druid. So we don't quite know exactly how that will be playing out, as well as the full rework of Shadow Priest. So we also are not quite sure how that will be playing out. And this will be very important because at the moment, Balance and Shadow are the two main picks in Mythic Plus for ranged. And these are the two specs which will be reworked. So it might end up in a disaster for both. So new specs will rise to be the strongest ones, or it might end up making them even stronger, or continue their current power level and keep them at this stage of being the more popular ones. Who knows? So that will mostly be up to Blizzard and to how they will continue to tune these two specs. More or less, you might always just end up defaulting to Warlock and Mage. Right? Generally, you might, sneak out at least one out of the three specs of these two classes to be somewhat relevant, somewhat meta. So that is always a pretty fan favorite choice for these two classes in the ranged DPS camp. We can then finish with one of my favorite stats, which is to check the most popular Mythic Plus comps week by week to see how the player base is evolving their priority in inviting certain specs. So we can see very well, even this week with new changes. Last week, once again, of course, we have Protection Paladin being the main tank in all groups. That's fine, we already knew it. We do have, however, an upside down. Last week it was mostly Resto Druids with some Resto Shamans. This week is the reverse. Now it's mostly Resto Shamans with some Resto Druids. We also have even more of a presence of Red Paladins, as mentioned. Last week we started getting the first entries of Red Paladins. Now they are overall the most popular DPS spec in terms of most popular comps in Mythic Plus, followed by Havoc, Demon Hunter, and right after that Beast Mastery Hunter. So these are the three to-go specs. At the moment, you also have quite a good presence of Shadow Priest as well as Subtlety Rogue. As a whole, however, you do see the changes brought by the patch quite clearly because, Resto Shaman was changed by the patch 10.0.7. You have Red Paladin changed by the patch. Prot Paladin, thanks to the changes of Red Paladin, was also changed from the patch. So we did have quite the significant impact of this patch on the presence of the specs in the Mythic Plus meta. So this is the current situation in Mythic Plus. In this week of Mythic Plus, with just as we mentioned about 4 resets left to the end of this season and 5 resets left to the beginning of Season 2. So, hoping you have already started to plan your leveling, your re-rolling, and your maining and outing of specs for Season 2, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your Saturday. We are starting our goodbyes as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of this channel. You can still, as usual, support in other ways that are completely free. For example, you can like and follow down below on this video, as well as, obviously, subscribing to the channel itself. You can then also follow me over on Twitter, as well as follow me over on my stream, right on Twitch, at these 2 links. So, with this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, goddamn, man. +1 degree at 9 PM in April.